there is something called the Pally. Right. Yeah, so there's something called the Pally test, which evaluates if a Métis group would have Section 35 rights, and this does give a clear outline. So we'll kind of go more into that in the next slide. And so yeah, we Métis people have our own distinct Indigenous people, so yay. Okay, so number 2, you know, I've heard a lot of this in U of T discussion. So like, there's no such thing as Métis. People usually have the connotation that like Métis groups aren't full Native. I get this one a lot. It's a bit brutal here, especially being a Métis woman. Yeah, I've heard this from the government as well in a lot of court cases, and from other Indigenous groups as well, which is like very unfortunate. So no, we do have our rights. Métis people have existed way before the Confederation in the 1800s. So there's proof of this in Ottawa museums. I've been to one before, and they do have something called Métis scripts. So Métis scripts are land deed documents, which were given to Métis people in a trading scenario. So the Métis people either sold land plots in exchange for money or food rations, or vice versa. So they, you know, bought land with their own money and resources. So as it mentions Métis directly, like in the Métis scripts, it would seem to inherently confirm our unique identity and the validation of our rights. And the third one, of course, being the Section 35 of the Constitution, which does confirm this as well in the most basic of forms, mind you. But it does state that status or treaty Indians, Métis, and Inuit are the 3 overarching groups in Canada. So those are the kind of Métis misconceptions and me debunking them. All right, let's go to the next slide. So the history of rights. So if Métis do exist, who exactly are we? So Métis is the French term for person of mixed parentage, and that derives from the Latin word mixticus, which means of mixed race. Michif is the language spoken by the Métis people of Western Canada and adjacent areas in the United States. So this is mostly a mix of Plains Cree, or it can be Chippewan as well, with French noun phrases. So we do have our own distinct language. So how do we define Métis? This is not so simple to determine, as there's no clear definition set out either in the Constitution or any other quote unquote Crown document. So this is why the Métis previously had relied on Section 35 of the Constitution Act, the documents of trades, either with the Hudson's Bay Company, with the church through birth and baptism records, and Métis scripts, which we mentioned before are lots of land allocated to Métis peoples or vice versa in the early 1900s. And the third one is in court. So there's something called the prima facie claims. So this is also a Latin word in a court setting, which means at first sight, accepted as correct or until proven otherwise. So this type of validation was set in stone with the Constitution. So let's say like if a Métis group is founded, it would take, they would be considered having a prima facie based rights until proven otherwise. So let's say if the government or whoever, took a Métis group to court, unless they had a solid facts-based case as to why a certain Métis group shouldn't have Indigenous rights, that Métis group would have a prima facie claim in the eyes of the law. So that was like before. So this definition was left alone until the creation of the Pally test. So this evaluation was most significant for the Métis in Canada. In a ruling with the Supreme Court in R versus Pally 2003, that was a landmark decision, as it was the official first recorded decision that provided a framework for analyzing Métis claims under Section 35. So the below here, as you can see, are some of the most important requirements set out in the Pally 10. So, like the characterization of the right, the identification of the historic and contemporary rights-bearing community. So what does this mean? So did these people practice their culture pre-Confederation, and do they still practice the same ones now? So as the court noted, that the term Métis under Section 35 does not refer to the mixed ancestry of individuals, but it does encompass more. So, being mixed with a Native group and like some European settler group, that doesn't mean you're Métis. It does encompass more. So this refers to the distinctive peoples who, in addition to their mixed ancestry, develop their own customs, way of life, and recognizable group identities separate from their Indian, Inuit, or European forebears. So this means that it must now confirm that the claimants that belong to some Métis community, they need a sufficient degree of continuity and stability to support a site-specific Aboriginal right. So that's just like a long way of saying, like, are they living together in the same geographic area, and do they share a common way of life? So because of this framework, the Métis have access to basic Indigenous rights such as hunting, fishing, land consultation for resource projects. That's a really important one, and many other rights like that that the government cannot dispute. So this can now translate into the same category of rights as compared to our treaty brothers and sisters. So yay for equality. It is important to mention that the government does not officially recognize this particular framework as an official system, but it does help Métis groups in modern court cases. And, it could be official in the future. We don't really know. So let's go to the next slide. So Métis rights in the North. So hopefully after all the details in finding Métis, you can appreciate a little Lou Rielmi, Canada's favorite rebel and a Métis legend. Okay, so as we know that Métis rights can be reinforced by the Pauli test, it's easier to base if a Métis group has a prima facie claim to a specific region. So in the North, if a Métis group has a lineage that spans between post-contact relations with European settlers and pre-Crown establishments, so when the government kind of took over the land here, we are able to be called a Métis group. So these groups needed to prove ancestry prior to 1890. So in the NWT, Métis settlements have been a part of the written record spanning all the way to the late 1700s. So that's a long time ago. So in Old Fort Ray, this is approximately 95 kilometers outside of Yellowknife, some of you might know. So this was an old area with recorded use with early Métis families. So the patriarch of several families in the NWT is Francois Beaulieu II. Some of you may have also heard of him too. So he was a historical Métis figure. He was born in 1771 at Salt River, and he led a pretty exciting life. So this was kind of like how the Métis established themselves in the NWT. So he was really well known for his ability to hunt meat, especially caribou, and he was relied upon supplying meat and pemmican to trading posts for expeditions. And according to the Hudson's Bay Company records from Fort Ray, so he was kind of a big hunter. He was the son of the first commercial miner in the NWT, and he held a monopoly on salt throughout the region, which during the fur trade and before the development of refrigeration, this was really important.
Cat right there.
Where?
It's all good.
You got a phone?
Yeah.
Okay. In 1793, Francois Beaulieu II accompanied Alexander Mackenzie on his overlap trip to the Pacific, and he was living on Great Bear Lake in 1799. This is when the Northwest Company, another trading company, arrived there to build a fort. So he was hired as their professional hunter. Also in 1890, he provided Sir John Franklin with a map and advised him to take the Great Bear Lake route. So this is the expeditions in 1825. Yeah, so very notable figures. And because of that, like, he was also appointed by Franklin to serve as the interpreter and the expediter for the trip. So fun fact, he was paid more than twice the maximum HBC pay rate at the time. Mad money. And to top things off, he was also supposedly a huge player, as he allegedly had more than one wife. So he also died a legend. So love that for him. Okay, so with all of this in mind, we kind of like have to wonder like why Métis groups would have trouble asserting their rights in the eyes of the crown, right? We have a clear history on the land. We adopted to like many ways of life using our own specific cultural tools. So, currently land-based rights have been a very contentious issue among many Métis areas. I'll mention an example here, just to show you how tough the court system can be for Indigenous groups asserting their rights. So one of the court cases in Enge versus Mandeville. So that's like my uncle, Bill Enge. He's the president of the North Slave Métis Alliance, or the NSMA. And he actually filed a lawsuit stating that the government of the Northwest Territories, or the GNWT, had failed to live up to the obligations to consult with the NSMA for the caribou harvesting season in 2013. So in short, the GNWT had given 300 hunting tags for caribou, This is like when the caribou, they were kind of dwindling in the numbers. So like a caribou tag was like very, very worthy back then, a few years back. So the GNWT had given 300 harvesting tags to 2 different indigenous groups in the North Slave region and gave nothing to the NSMA. So when asking for explanations why, or if the NSMA could be given a fair share of the tags, the government had refused to intervene and stated that they could go to the other groups themselves and ask for tags from them. And I'm sure like any indigenous person knows, like, we love our caribou. Like, have you ever been given a piece of dry meat from your cousin? And then, they gave you a dirty look when you wanted another piece. Like, we all know we love our dry meat. So it would be kind of hard to ask for, tags. So that's kind of like what it would have felt to the NSMA. But anyways, like when the NSMA proved their prima facie claim in court to assert that they did in fact fulfill the Pauli 10 test, as we mentioned before, the Supreme Court had ruled in favor of the NSMA in the end and directed the GNWT to allocate caribou tags following the decision, which was 2 years later. So this was kind of the first judicial decision successfully secured in Canada to apply the duty to consult to a Métis community. So this was kind of a groundbreaking court case here. So this, litigation led to not only like an equitable share of the caribou, but it also signified that the community members could exercise their Indigenous right as Métis to harvest on their territories, the, historical territories. So very important. Okay. Yeah, so we kind of get into like the last part of this. So, hopefully you guys get to see under the tip of the iceberg of Métis rights. There are a few books I can recommend to anyone interested in reading up on this more. Yeah, so I just kind of want to end on the note where, lately I've been really happy to see the revival of our culture. Being here today with treaty talks, like it's so great to see like interest in Indigenous knowledge like rising. On like Instagram, I see a lot of meeting accounts and like Indigenous meme pages and artwork and all of this. And it's great to see how far we've come in our decolonial journey. So I'll kind of leave you with a little food for thought, literally. So as Peter mentioned, I am starting my education in nutrition. And I think it's so important to decolonize our diets. Like I know food insecurity in the North is like a really big issue. It's like super expensive and like the quality just like is not there. And it can be tiring to like cook healthy 24/7, especially in the North. But I think it's really worthwhile to think about like what we're putting into our bodies. So all of the processed foods we consume, like, and I've totally been there, like eating all the chips, like all the canned foods, the bleached flour, the refined white sugars, like, but when you think about it, it's like not what we ate. It's not what our ancestors ate. It's like kind of harming us from the inside out. These foods were like not made to nurture us at all. It does not keep our bodies strong whatsoever. These were like manufactured to keep us from achieving what we could and like made to keep us sick. And this has been proven. Like there was this book published called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration by, I think it was like Weston Price. So he kind of like wrote a book on like when Indigenous people were introduced to colonial foods, it actually disrupted their teeth. So like the dental work, their teeth became crooked and jagged and completely rotting from the inside out. And this was studied in like various cultures around the world, not just, in Canada. So thankfully we have dental tools now, but I feel really bad. Like I feel sad for our prior relations and like what they must have gone through with that. And yeah, so, Indigenous diets, that's where it's at. And the last part is gut health and mental health. So I actually noticed a huge change in my mental health and like the connection to the land. And I feel like when I ate, a more whole foods and cooked diet, like I really started to heal from intergenerational trauma. And, when you change the way that you relate to food, so like how intentional you eat and reflecting on emotions behind the food, that it all adds up. And when you go berry picking, let's say, or if you go hunting with your friends, or like when you go fishing with your friends, and I've noticed a huge change in like, the spirit of the food, like the energy is different. And it did make me happier. It gave me more energy. And there's actually a few books that does study this relation. So there is actual scientific evidence that the gut health is directly related to mental health. So in books, The Second Brain, The Mind-Gut Connection, like both of these books, and I'm sure many others, have studied how 95% of the serotonin made in your body is actually produced in the gut. Like you think like, oh, serotonin is like the brain process. No, like 95% of it is made in the gut. So, a lot of untapped potential there. Yeah, so some ways that we can kind of, promote some gut health is to get that good bacteria back into like the microbiome and supporting that by eating fiber-rich foods. But I could go into this all day, but, this could be a really great way to accompany mental health supports in the North. It's another way we can also heal. We can like start healing from inside out. So yeah, I'll end off with a note, because our people have been so systemically targeted, historically by ways which were out of our control. But I think like eating well and like nourishing yourself, nourishing your spirit is like one way that we can change ourselves and take back that control. So thank you, Mussy. The floor is now open for questions if anyone has anything that they'd like to bring. Well, okay, let's see.
Peter, you should be able to talk now.
Hey. Yeah, I was not able to get unmuted there. Thanks so much. That was a great presentation. I think I might have learned more about Métis rights in the 20 minutes to 30 minutes than I ever have. And I really find it interesting the relationship that you drew between our diets and colonization and our mental health. And I definitely want to dive into that more. And we do have some questions right now. I'm just wondering if maybe we'll save the questions for the end and start with Chloe's presentation now, and then we'll kind of direct the questions at both of you. And so, again, thank you so much. Like I said, and I love talking about dry meat too. It always makes me like, man, it goes right to here, and I love it. So yeah, let's talk about that later. And Chloe, how's Chloe? Long time no talk.
Hello.
Good to see you. Good to have you here. I'll let you do your thing.
Okay. Atlanetea, sezi Chloe Dragonsmith Soulier, denende stiasti, sits e ama Brenda Dragon Houllier, sits e aba Leonard Smith Houllier. So hello everybody. My name's Chloe Dragonsmith. I come from Denende, and my mother is Brenda Dragon. My father is Leonard Smith. And thank you so much to the organizers and to Nicole for going through such a comprehensive presentation of Métis rights. I learned a lot as well. It's great. I wanted to start my presentation by situating myself, I guess, and my identity within the Métis and land and treaty paradigm. So I guess for me, my whole life, I grew up being identified as Métis. I'm also, like Nicole, part of the North Slave Métis Alliance, a member, and my whole family was Métis. So my grandmother and her parents and her grandparents were Métis. I guess about 6 or 7 years ago, my family reclaimed their treaty status, and they had lost it a while back due to enfranchisement tactics of the government through a choice between script and treaty. So some of my family chose script and some chose treaty. And so we ended up with this split down my family. Once that came to light within the government and they started to make reparations, some of my family became treaty again. So my mother is now treaty Indian once again, as are two of my uncles. Two of my aunties are Métis. A couple of cousins are treaty. I am still Métis. And I think what I've learned is that Métis identity, for me and my perspective, is deeply, deeply personal, and it can be difficult to discuss in a bounded way. And you can see back and forth through history that the government of Canada has used both First Nations people and Métis people, and probably Inuit people as well, though I don't know as much about that, to benefit essentially themselves. So whatever rights and privileges were granted at any given time serve in a way to divide and conquer people. And I feel like, myself at this current point in time, I have a lot to understand about that and work through. As I said, I'm still a Métis in the eyes of the government, but my ancestry is both Métis and First Nations. So as Nicole was talking about the settlements in Old Fort Rae, I have ancestors that were absolutely living in Old Fort Rae and tied to those Métis settlements. I also have Dene Santinais relatives that were tied to First Nations around Fort Smith. And so, everybody's a mix of something. And, most of us, whether Métis or First Nations, have settler roots as well. But it's interesting because we're not often, that the Métis and First Nations are not often used together in the same identity. And I think that has a lot to do with the government, because we were, and still are, forced to choose if we are Métis or First Nation. So if I was to take treaty at this point, which is available to me, I would be no longer Métis. And as far as I can tell, and I'm actually interested if Nicole knows the answer to this, so I might add this to the list of the questions for Nicole, but I don't think that if you become treaty, that you have a chance to regain your Métis status. So you actually do have to choose if you're going to be identified as Métis or First Nations. So that's just a little bit of my own personal background and where I come to in this discussion. And, I even doing this talk for me has brought back a lot of that. And it's got me to investigate and think about, who am I in terms of history? What role does the government have to play in all of this? And where do we go from here? The other frame that I come to this with is a frame of Indigenous conservation. So Indigenous protected and conserved areas are a new-ish coined concept to describe something that's been happening for a really long time, which is how do Indigenous peoples take care of land? And how do we do that across Canada in each of our own self-determined ways? It's a new way to describe very, very old practices and bring them into the modern sphere of governance. Métis roles within Indigenous protected and conserved areas are something that has really interested me because of my own personal identity, and also because it's really complex and there's a lot of layers. So often an Indigenous protected or conserved area starts with a land base. So for many First Nations, that makes a lot of sense. They have land claims, they have areas that they can start to work with the government of Canada, who's really supporting these initiatives at this time, to establish areas that are governed and managed by Indigenous peoples. Métis don't, in many cases, have that land base across Canada. And so it becomes interesting. What does Métis conservation look like when there is no specific area-based governance? The other part that I have found very tricky is that the federal government funds Métis and First Nations in different streams, and they do it separately still today. So what I've found through that is a lot of division being created when you're working at a national level in lands and what's happening with lands. There's a lot of political divide and very difficult walls to break down. And then you go to meetings in communities, and most of you probably know, you sit down at a table and everybody's your cousin, and some are Métis and some are First Nation, and we're able to go fishing together and share our dry meat and share a bannock. But as soon as we're sitting at the political table and the funding streams are different, it can be difficult to meet in the middle. So that's something else that I found that has complicated that discussion for the Métis. And I think a lot about how to overcome that problem. I'm gonna, like, spoiler alert, I don't have any answers. It's a really complex issue, but I think the conclusion I've come to is that delving into that question is maybe the key to moving forward in a good way. And that's because, to me, from my perspective as a Métis, we have a bit of a superpower, and that is that we can be bridge builders, and we have always been bridge builders. And we are at this intersection of settler and First Nation societies where we have co-created what has become of Canada today. And so what I see is that if we could harness that and take that opportunity to be who we truly are and bring those gifts that are intrinsic to us, we could start to move forward in a way that looks at land in a less bounded way, just like how Métis identity is very difficult as the land is as well, yet we do it. So that's something that always never quite sits right to me. Even in the conversations of Indigenous-led conservation, we still turn quickly to settler colonial portrayals of land, with borders and ownership. Even when we talk traditional territories, sometimes that doesn't make so much sense to me because people moved a lot across the NWT and the North, and we constantly mixed and changed and moved, and the land dictated where we were at any given time. This holds very true to me today because I do live with my partner in Wood Buffalo National Park. We live in a trapping cabin just over the border in northern Alberta. Our road access is to Fort Smith, and we have boat access and winter road access to Fort Chipewyan. A lot of my family lives in Fort Smith. A lot of his family lives in Fort Chipewyan. And especially through the last couple of years of COVID, we've had crazy issues with the border, as I'm sure everybody can probably appreciate, with the NWT border being closed down. So us living in the bush away from civilization kind of got subject to this push and pull of the border, which seemed and still seems very ridiculous to me because the land has no borders and the animals have no borders. And so I guess that's a long-winded way to say, when I look at the Métis and the role that Métis peoples have to play in our future, I look at the land and I say, what are the aspects of land that cannot also be easily put into a border or into a box. And there are many. There's migrating animals, there's forest fires, there's waterways, there's people, our youth, young people, and all of these things, as much as we can try to say we exist within certain parameters, we really don't. And I think that that's natural law. That's something that comes directly from the land, and that has the potential to show us a good way forward and a way to breach into the conversation that we don't often hear about. What does conservation look like, and what does collaboration look like if we do not have borders? So I think that, the Métis have a lot of challenges, and I see it. I do. I see it in a sense, in a detached way, because, like I said at the start of this conversation, my identity is both First Nations and Métis and settler. And so I'm never going into any of these conversations trying to advocate, I guess, for a certain privilege, but rather I see myself as where I come from and what I know in my own family, or at least I try to. And I think that being Métis, we can help everybody move past this concept that has been clearly problematic, and that is that of land ownership and land borders and keeping each other out. And once again, I don't fully know the answers to how to do that, but I really feel that it's there. And the potential is within the Métis to be able to draw from who we are and how we've been treated, in a sense, like the land in Canada. It's back and forth. We have rights, we don't. We're a peoples, we're not. And when we are looking to do what is best for the land, can it possibly be anything within a border, or are there these amalgamating factors that can actually help to bring it all together? And that's not to say that land claims and traditional areas are not helpful. We are living within a colonized paradigm right now, and I think it's essentially important to get our land back in that way as well. But what I do think is that there's different roles for everybody, and that the Métis could have a very specific one that maybe has not yet been valued in the space of treaties and land claims and protected areas. I think it touches deeply on a piece that is more responsibilities than rights. So what are our responsibilities on the land? What does it mean to be peoples on the land, and who are we doing it for? And I think, the further we can get away from reliance on the Canadian government and on outside big funders, and the more that we can believe in ourselves, whether we're called First Nations by the government, whether we're called Métis by the government, or whether we're new to this land as settlers, I think we need to believe in ourselves and what we can bring and what's intrinsic to who we are through history, our ancestors and our DNA. And I think, that's one of the most truly Indigenous things I can think of, is self-actualizing, looking within ourselves, and what do we have to bring, and how can we work together to put that to a bigger picture and affect change. So I would just encourage everybody, no matter your identity, whether in your own eyes or whether in the eyes of someone who's telling you what you are, which is another beast entirely, we can still believe in ourselves and look into that for a future together. And I guess that's what I hope for. That's what I hope for the Métis, and that's what I hope for myself as somebody with Métis ancestry. I think I'm going to leave it there for now and go to questions. Thank you. Tahuna. We say tahuna in Dene Sansine. It means live a long time. It's our way of saying thank you.
Takuna. Masi cho, ninteve gozu. We say that for good luck on your path. Wow, both of you. Whenever I think about Indigenous knowledge and everything, I've been hearing more and more about the roles that Métis have played between bridging the Western world and Indigenous peoples, and more about this. And I think we're all operating still in colonial paradigms and Western mindsets, as they say, of the land, and trying to be very specific about our land rights. And I really feel as though after this presentation that Métis rights are a good way to help us better understand it. And so I want to go right into some questions here that one thing I noticed Chloe was talking about in a good way, and that Nicole talked about the spirit of the food and how it makes you happy. And I also heard about the divide and conquer and the division that exists among First Nations people. And I think this is a challenge that everybody faces. And one of the reasons why we started treaty talks. So I just want to ask both of you, how did you move past these things in your early career? How did you move past potential lateral violence or these big hurdles of divide and conquer and moving past seeing family members on maybe different political ends of the spectrum? And we'll start with Nicole.
Hey, yeah, that's a really great question. Yeah, still kind of tackling it a little bit myself, but I think when you kind of like reflect on it, I think it's like the relationships, like just like strengthening connections. It doesn't really have to be family either. Like it can be like Métis groups, different area. It can be just, a friend or like a mentor. I think like just building connections, we can kind of start seeing the humanity of it. So I think like not treating your enemy like an enemy, more just like a possible way to discuss things. So like having an honest and open discussion, I feel like that could like lead to a lot of like a lot of progress within yourself. And like you don't need to like reach a mutual decision or anything. I just like think like for yourself, like for your own peace of mind, I think like you should definitely prioritize that. So just like getting peace within yourself, getting peace, with your identity, being Métis, it is like very divisive. Like you are kind of forced to choose between one or the other. And like that's just not the case. You can't do that. You have to like accept your identity, like who you are. Some people, have their own way of life, but I think like being authentic in yourself, like what feels right to you, and kind of like building upon that, like however feels authentic to you. I feel at least like that's in my experience. I don't know. What do you think, Chloe?
I completely agree. Hang on. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I completely agree, Nicole. I think, what's given me strength is being able to see myself and my connection to land and community over the labels of others. And I think that's really key. And I almost see that was the challenge I had, and it's also the opportunity I had by having several different labels. I was never stuck to one, but I also had to reconcile that I had many, and that wasn't, and still sometimes isn't easy. But that is, I think, where the grounding comes from. And for me, truly, it does come from land. It comes from spending a lot of time on the land and building my relationships with those on the land around me. People often ask us, because we live in the bush, and they say, do you guys get lonely out there, or you get sick of each other? And it's funny because we don't. And it's because all around us are communities of many others. And it's, they keep us occupied, they keep us guessing, they keep us learning. And so I think building our relationships with land is the absolute way that I have found to stay strong in my own identity. I would also say, you know, for the lateral violence piece, I don't know where I'd be if I didn't have the opportunities to look outside of my own, I guess, my own nations and peoples. It was really important for me to be able to talk to others across Canada in a couple of opportunities that I had to do that, to see other people's struggles and understand yourself at a bigger picture maybe than the lateral violence that goes on in communities, because it can be really, really tricky.
Awesome, great. Every time you guys say something, I have 10 more questions, but we do have some questions for the audience, so I'm gonna have to skip from that. So we have a question from Raina Bichukwa for Nicole here. But she asked, what are your favorite foods to keep healthy and maintain great gut health?
I love this question. It's very important to me. I think like gut health, that's like where the health really starts. That's like truly where the health starts. There are a lot of like very specific foods that can kind of like fulfill your body's nutrients, like minerals and nutrients. The two biggest ones for your gut, I would say, are the taste. If you get over the taste, it's like super good for you. It's called spirulina. Maybe some people have heard it. It's like a seaweed. It's like a little powder seaweed. That's like the best thing you can drink. And like, that's like super important for health. If you can stand it, also sea moss. But just like for foods, I guess, like beyond just like supplements like that, I would say eating a lot more like grains that aren't processed. So that would be like quinoa, millet, buckwheat. Those are very, very good for you. Also just like whole wheat in general, but the kind that you get at the supermarket were not made for, you know, nurturing the body. So I would say like bake your own bread with like very good flour. That's like a very good alternative as well. Lots of fruits and veggies. Try to stay within the greens. You know, potatoes and peppers and things like that. Like they aren't the best for you health wise. So I would just like stick to fruits in the morning. You can also do like dairy-free yogurt or yogurt, however you kind of like prefer. So those are the top foods I would say. And yeah, just like increase your greens, like kale. It's not as gross as people think. I would say that.
Thanks, Nicole. I really love your perspective on food and mental health. I'm freezing up here. I'm not sure if everyone can hear me, but I want to continue and go ahead and how gut health is related to being happy and how traditional food makes you happy. And my juju always told me to be happy, and I learned that that was a traditional law, and how interconnected everything is from what we eat and how it's been colonized, and how decolonizing our food can lead to better health. And I really noticed in Chloe's presentation, she situated herself in the story of being Métis and the Indigenous story in Canada. And I've heard that it's very important to start our discussions in those ways, in a good way. And I heard Nicole talking about, or Chloe talking about a good way. And I just want to ask you, why do you think that's why it's important to begin your conversations by situating yourself in your story? Can everyone hear me? Or can anyone hear me, Nicole?
Hello,
Hi, did anyone get my question there?
Peter. Sorry, my computer was freezing, so I missed the last question.
Oh, for that, this is Nicole talking?
This is Chloe.
Chloe,
It
sorry.
also says my video is disabled by the host.
Okay. Okay, well, yeah, that's okay. I can repeat the question. I've saying that I really appreciate Nicole's perspective on eating and how it affects our mental health and how everything's related. And you know, as we deconstruct colonial concepts, we realize that everything's related. And she talked about how eating decolonially makes her happy. Sorry, these are some big words going around in my head. And my Juju always said to be happy and to do things in a good way. And I heard you talking about doing things in a good way. And I noticed that in your introduction, you really put yourself in your story of being Métis and what it means in the larger context. And I've been told to do that in a good way. And I really think you've done that gracefully. And I just wanted to ask why you think that's important, putting ourselves into the story of our nationhood or our identity.
That's a great question. I think the way I'll choose to answer that one is, so there's the pyramid of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And basically, if you haven't looked into that one, it's where it's this pyramid that explains the importance of our needs and the foundations of our pyramid that we need to first, before we can start to philosophize and understand the world and ourselves. We have to have the privilege and the ability to have you know, our needs like food and water and shelter, these physical needs met. And through the work I've done, I've come to understand that Indigenous peoples often reverse this pyramid of needs. And there is some literature from a Blackfoot, I believe, perspective on that. But I think it applies to most Indigenous peoples and worldviews, and it certainly makes sense to me that what actually comes at the top of our needs is actualizing ourselves and understanding ourselves and our identity. And if we don't have that spiritual alignment with who we are, where we come from, what community we fit into, a lot else falls apart, and we actually end up losing those fundamental physical needs that we also need to survive. And so that self-actualization and who we are, what our roles are, and who we are within a community is really, really key from an Indigenous worldview and perspective. And so I feel that very deeply just within myself and how I relate to the world. Maybe it makes sense to some of you, but for me, that's why that's so important. Thanks for the question.
No problem. And I'm going to, so this is a question from Ahmed. I'm sorry, I'm really sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. It's for Nicole. What would you recommend to follow and maintain a healthy nutrition life and work-life balance?
Yeah, that's a really good one too. And I feel like that affects a lot of us. A lot of us do have to work, unfortunately. So I feel like maintaining a good balance is like super key as well, because like not all of us like have like some private chef in your house, like making you all these foods while you're kind of like out doing your thing. So I think that, you know, having a good morning routine and also meal prepping, I feel like those two are the very most important parts. So, you know, going to bed a little bit earlier, waking up and like prepping food, or prepping food like, you know, some set days, and then like kind of having like the leftovers, you know, set out for you would make things a lot easier. At least I feel like that is for me. People can do it in different ways, but yeah, I think like that is key. And yeah, I would say, and like eating fresh, like it would help to do like one day where you can buy groceries and then kind of like do like little tasks every day, so it doesn't feel so monumental. Also easy recipes are really great too. Like you don't need to have some gourmet level Gordon Ramsay chef, oh, like big huzzah in the kitchen. Like you can have like simple meals too. Simple is better. And, you know, following a really good like whole foods diet, that really coincides very well. So I would say that's the two big parts.
Cool. I definitely got to work on the diet if I want to be a healthy, strong, sovereign, indigenous Squitchin man. So I appreciate that. So this is an interesting question. I'll pose it to both of you. It's I like it because it's could an indigenous system work for all of Canada? Do we have enough animals in Canada to feed everyone in Canada? I'll leave that. If we hunted and trapped for everybody, do you think we could do it? I mean, I could definitely get all the caribou we need, but I mean, outside of that,
I can take a
either
stab
one
at
of you.
that one. So, the interesting thing about hunting and trapping is that these practices have helped to actually maintain abundance on the land, if done right, for a long, long time. And so I don't necessarily know the answer to that very great question. But what I will say is that if we were to actually do it right and be living in relationship with land, from my understanding and what I see of us living on the land and trapping and hunting and full-time harvesting, you are able to be in tune with the land in a way that allows you to understand what the limits are and that you would never surpass them, because it's not really the same. It's not the same as just consuming. And so what you're doing is you're giving back, like the carcasses from the trap line go back to the land and they serve to feed others that are growing families on the land. And so on, the cycle of reciprocity goes. And so I feel like we're very far from that right now. But if we could come to a place where we were living in harmony with the land and by natural law, I think that it is, I don't know that the system necessarily has a bound. And I don't think it is the input or output of animals from the system that is the problem, but rather the way we're relating with the land and building our place and our role. I don't know if that answers that.
I think that answers that greatly. It speaks, I think the question is would we have the proper system to be able to do that? And would we be able to change our thinking enough? And I really enjoy that perspective. Nicole, do you have anything to say on that?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, we would need a complete revamp of the system, like, for that to kind of work. But in an ideal world, I do believe that we probably could, because historically, like, people have, done their part in little ways. Like, someone hunts, someone gathers, someone, grows the squash. Everyone had their like place in society, and I feel when people work together, when there's that communication, there's that community. It would have been like a lot easier. Pre-colonial times, yes, I would say like, yeah, like there was enough abundance of foods for people, but now it's hard to say. Following like contact with settlers, I don't know if anyone has seen that photo of like in the US, the huge mound of like buffalo skulls. And like that's the only way that the settlers in the US could have defeated the indigenous people in the US, like by completely cutting off their food source and like completely laying to waste like hundreds, if not thousands of buffalo. So I think like pre-colonial times, people knew how to share. Not saying that it's not the case now, but it would help. That's my 2 cents.
Thanks. There's definitely a more insightful than mine. I've never even got a caribou before, so my system probably actually wouldn't work if I was supplying the caribou, but that's another story. I did notice, so we got another question here. Sorry, another question. I'll go over there before I switch to some of my other questions. This one's for both of you. It's from Shanto. How do we move forward when it's the older generation that have the thought that Métis don't have a claim? It's hard to rebuild a nation with these sorts of ideology happening. So this is, I'll give you both a chance to answer this. Whoever wants to go first, please feel free.
Is Chloe here? I don't mind going first.
Yeah, I think she's having some technical difficulties, so I think I'll let you go first here.
Okay, yeah, that's like a huge issue. Oh, Chloe's here. Yeah, so the older generation, I've like seen this as well, like a lot of the elders like, oh, Métis don't exist, and like that is one of the misconceptions as well. I think like this goes to like most older generations when they're, you know, misinformed or haven't grown up in the context like that we do now. Like we're very privileged to grow up in an age of information. Like we have the internet like accessible to us. We have people of different perspectives, you know, migrating in different areas, and you kind of get that wealth of knowledge like through interacting. So I do think that there would have to be a level of information education. And I think like things like this, like treaty talks, I feel like this could be a really great way for, you know, engaging elders and like, you know, in their specific way, like whether that's on Facebook, them elders love Facebook. Yeah, so rebuilding nations with, you know, different ideology like this, it is very hard. I think nowadays, like when you see court cases kind of like reinforcing Métis rights, they have a little bit more claim because like, oh, like, you know, it's like this solid piece of hard, you know, based evidence that, you know, has gone through the Supreme Court. I feel like now you have like some basis where you can say like, hey, grandpa, you know, like when you say this stuff about, you know, whatever group, could be Métis, a different group, you know, like, you know, you're actually kind of misinformed. Maybe you should like read up on this, or, you know, just like having these conversations in a healthy, positive way where, you know, you're not like completely just blaming them for their lack of knowledge on the topic, but just fostering like, no, just that bridge of connections. I feel like that would be one way to do it, at least. If Chloe has any other thoughts.
I do. Thank you. Sorry about that, everybody. So yeah, I 100% agree. I think that, you know, recognizing everybody's experience as valid is really key, because it depends, I think, a lot on, with Métis and First Nations politics, I think it depends a lot on, first of all, where you are, and second of all, what time you're in. Because there's, again, this push and pull from government about rights and different situations that arise. And I find that by talking to others who have these vastly different experiences. So, you know, that's what, you know, when I speak, I try to just speak from my own personal experience, because I've come across so many different experiences. So I think being able to validate others and is a good way to get past that like initial block wall of not wanting to move forward into solutions. And then as well as that, I guess just working to realize that, yeah, that Métis, I guess that Métis responsibilities maybe require us to be humble in a sense. And that's what I also try to think about, like our role as bridge builders, to be able to, is maybe to be able to, in a sense, mediate these conversations and bring some humanity to what it means to be in the middle of a system that pushes and pulls and tells you who you are. And that maybe that humbleness and humility is something that can resonate with others and come through in a way that's not threatening. That's the best I got.
Your best is pretty good, so before it gets too late, we're still going to keep going with questions a little bit here, but are there any recommendations that you would have for books or resources for learning more about Métis rights, particularly in regards to the treaty? And this, I'll start with Nicole here and then go back to Chloe.
There is one I would recommend. I believe it's called like Distorted Descent. It's like white claims to Indigenous identity. I remember my uncle mentioning this book when he won the court case, and he was like, "Oh, like if you kind of want to read more on, you know, Métis struggles and like kind of like Métis ideology and kind of like how that fits into mainstream Indigenous thought, you can give this one a go." Yeah, I think like history would be a good place to start as well. Like history of like the Métis inception, like François Beaulieu II. I thought he has a really interesting, you know, history, you know, being Métis. Yeah, I would say those two. What about you, Chloe?
It's funny. I haven't actually read any books about the like specifically Métis rights and responsibilities context. I'm also interested to do that. So I'd be interested, you know, if anybody knows any, write them in the chat. I do have some book recommendations though. There's one author named John Ralston Saul. He's a settler author, but he writes on a perspective of the formation of Canada, I guess, and the Métis role within it, which is really interesting. So his book is called A Fair Country. And then there's a follow-up book called The Comeback. They're both great. And then another book, which is pretty well known and famous, but I'll throw it out there in case some haven't heard of it, called Breeding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Talks about plants and breeding worldviews, which I think is exceedingly relevant to the Métis experience, although it's not an explicitly Métis read.
Awesome. Those are some great suggestions. I also have a suggestion. There's a book called Indigenous Rights, spelled WRITE, and it kind of dives into the Métis identity and part of it, which is something that is hard to describe sometimes for many people. And speaking of that, we do have a question from Jade, and either one of you may feel free to answer this one. Can current immigrants become Métis, or is it dependent on the time you arrived? Anyone want to speak to that? I'll go with Chloe. She seems like she wants to say something.
So I don't actually know the legal backings to this one, but Métis communities were here before Confederation, and I think, you know, your ancestry being tied to that is a really important factor in being a Métis. So unless you were an immigrant that came in and was interbred into a Métis bloodline, I think that maybe could be possible in that case, Nicole.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, there kind of has to be that lineage connection. You know, you can marry a Métis person, then your kid would kind of be Métis. But yeah, that would be the only way. I don't think you can just naturalize yourself into the situation, but that'd be very cool if you could.
Yeah, good stuff. So Pascal Erasmus asks, what are your opinions about modern industrial food systems, factory farms, fish farms, climate impacts, etc.? And how do we as Indigenous people overcome the immense structural challenges in relation to our modern food systems? So I'll go with Chloe because I have a feeling, Nicole, you're going to want to comment on this. I'll give you a moment, and I'll start with Chloe here.
Sure. So I guess what I understand as being somebody that lives now full-time with the land, and we harvest full-time, and we trap and we hunt. The greatest injustice that you can do to an animal or to a human is to take away self-determination. And that's the beautiful thing about living in a wild system and letting natural law be the ultimate ruler, and everybody's working within the same system. Once you take animals and you start to domesticate them, we start to have a really interesting conversation. And once again, I'm not sure I know all the answers to that, but what I do know is that we don't just have treaties with each other, but we have treaties with all other relations on the land, and to take them and exert our control is a very similar thing that was done to Indigenous peoples, and it's just about the worst thing I think you can do to hearts and spirits. And so industrial food systems unfortunately embody a lot of that and a lot of the injustices I think we see today. As far as overcoming it, I think, living, as Nicole says, in our own decolonial food systems as best we can, being cognizant of that, and not just in where it concerns food, but in all ways having relationships with those around us, I think is really key to overcoming that within our own psyches, because I think we all, including myself, have to overcome that in some way or another. As far as a large scale, supporting local Indigenous food industries and economies as much as possible is something that I see resurging and I have a lot of hope for. Nicole?
That was a great answer. It was very powerful. I agree with Kayla in the comments. Yeah, so the modern, like from my perspective, like researching and like reading books on this, like watching documentaries, like the modern industrial food system, it was never about, feeding people. It was never about, nourishing our bodies. It was all about profits. So like the way that factory farms are set up, fish farms, these contribute heavily to climate impacts. And like people, I don't know if anyone has seen that Netflix documentary, like about the fishing farms. I forget the name of it, but that was a very crazy documentary if anyone wants to check that out. So yeah, it's just like never about feeding people. It was always more about like how much can we line our pockets with these profits? And it's very disgusting. How can we overcome this? That one's a hard one. I feel like Chloe said, kind of removing yourself from that system would be like the best way to go about it. So, like farming yourself, or supporting like Indigenous farmers, that'd be like a great way to do it. Eating local, eating, organic, eating animals that you may have like hunted yourself, or someone that has hunted it. So the spirit of the food is intact. Because the food that we do consume in this like very industrial type of way, like the spirit of the food is just like completely removed. All nutrients, are, kind of taken out of it. And there was this like very interesting study done. They've compared seeds from the 1910s, and they compared to seeds like nowadays, and like 80% to 90% of like, magnesium, zinc, calcium in spinach and like these very healthy foods have like completely plummeted to like 80-90%. So even when we think we're kind of eating healthy, we're not getting as much of the macronutrients that our forefathers have gotten, which is like very unfortunate. So just like buying organic seeds and like even growing them yourself is a really great way to do that. Yeah, that is Seaspiracy. Yeah, that's fine. So just like removing yourself from that would be the best way to go, I would say.
Awesome, great answers. I'm really hearing. I really enjoy learning about perspectives on treaties from other First Nations and Métis and Inuit people. And Chloe had spoke about how getting that broader perspective really helps to move out of those barriers that we face in our own communities sometimes. And I was just about to get to a final thought here for a final question, but I have two more questions. One from JC is, how can we better support Métis people? And I'll ask these two questions before I start summing things up. But how can we better support Métis people? And I'll give you both a chance to answer this. And this time I'll put Nicole up first.
Supporting Métis people. I guess like giving them a space to voice, all of like their perspectives. I think like, just like having those conversations, fostering that. Yeah, also maybe like educating people that maybe do not know too much about Métis. Because the two misconceptions that I had in my thing, like, Métis people are just like mixed with whatever, then you're kind of Métis. That's not the case. And I hear that so much, like all the time. Yeah, also, investing and like supporting Métis like projects, like Métis beading, Métis projects, artwork, documentaries, people that want to kind of break out in different industries where we don't likely see a lot of Métis people. That would be a great way to do that as well. Yeah, what about you, Chloe? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. I think it's the conversations that need to happen from my perspective. Like I guess I tried to articulate in my little presentation at the start, there's something about Métis identity that is a very big opportunity and key, I think, to the fabric of Canada moving forward and our collaborations as Indigenous peoples. But we can't get there if we don't have those good conversations about it. That's for myself included. What this conversation sparked in me was to have more conversations about Métis identity and explore it more for myself. And they're sometimes really difficult and charged conversations with relatives and people we care about. And I guess the question to ask is why? And does that come from us, or does that come from something that was imposed on us? And I really do believe personally that it was something that was imposed on us and continues to be, and we can overcome it by getting past those barriers on our own. At least I hope that we can, and I hope that I can. And so engaging in that history and in those conversations and doing your own learning, whether you're Métis or First Nation or Inuit or settler, I think that would be my suggestion for how to support Métis people.
Cool, that makes me feel really good because we had a big conversation about having Métis representation during the speaker series, and we felt it was very important to communicate these things. And I'm glad that we could start that work. I definitely feel as though that the Métis hold a big piece of the puzzle for figuring out the whole mess of colonial constructs that exist. I know that I've known people define me as Métis before, which is not how my Juju would call me, and it's been a conversation that's impacted my whole life. And I really look forward to hopefully having this conversation more as treaty talks. And so we have one more question, a little bit more on the ground question. Is there any thoughts on caribou hunting on the winter road to the mines? Now, I don't know which mines Shanto is talking about, but I'm guessing that you two may be familiar. It is not a traditional way to hunt, but it is a popular way this day of age. So highway hunting question, big question.
That's a great question, and it's a doozy to end on, but I'm happy to take a stab at it. I think ultimately the most important thing is to be maintaining our relationships with our other relations in the best way possible and the best way that's available to us. And now for lots of people, hunting on roads and where there is access is the way that we can do that. But I guess the key to me is doing it in a good way. So the people that are going up on the winter road and slaughtering caribou, perhaps there's all kinds of rumors that we've all heard about that, I think, and, people under the influence and disrespectful harvesting practices. That really concerns me. The actual act of hunting on the road doesn't so much concern me. What I would be more concerned about is if people couldn't get access to the land and harvest at all, and we lose those skills and that very important relationship with caribou, where we do harvest caribou respectfully, because that is our cycle of reciprocity. And when we, when we harvest a caribou, we keep a lot of skills and knowledge alive. We eat caribou, we talk about it. We talk about it on our treaty talks. Peter even opened us up talking about dry meat. The caribou needs that reciprocity and the love and the understanding that comes back to them through that. And so to have that lost would be the worst outcome of all to me. I hope that we can learn to respect the roads and the access they give us, to not be disrespecting the lives of caribou in that way, and to be keeping the relationship alive. So I guess in a sense, I'm on board with it, and in a sense I'm not. So I'll leave it there. I could talk about that for a whole other hour and a half, actually.
Good, because we might do more speaker series. So you just volunteered yourself.
I am in.
And Nicole, any thoughts on that?
I agree with Chloe. It's like very important to keep the traditions alive, because, in the presentation, like in the eyes of law, like you wouldn't really be seen as Métis if you didn't keep up like your cultural traditions post contact with settlers. So it's very important to keep that alive. And I feel like, in a deep part of, our core of being Indigenous, like that relationship with the land, as Chloe mentioned before, I feel like that just like really feeds the soul. So I think like, keeping that alive, eating your caribou, picking your berries, all of that, just adds a little bit every day. And I think, hunting it, however, whatever access you have isn't the issue, but I think just like keeping it very respectful, honoring all parts of the caribou is very important. And yeah, I think I pretty much agree.
I just have one more thing to say. As far as traditional ways to hunt, I think through a culture, I think it's fair to say that our values can stay the same over time, and that's what guides us. But our tools are always changing as the times change, and so we're adapting, and we're growing, and we're changing within a culture, and I think that's what makes an alive culture. And so we have a responsibility to take whatever tools we have in the current day and to put our own values onto those tools. And I guess, to wrap it all up, I guess that comes back to the Métis experience and, who we are, whether we have the tools of a land base or what rights look like at any given time. Our values and our responsibilities to land and to others remain the same. And so if that's what we can hold on to, I think hopefully that provides us a foundation that's pretty unshakable.
Yes, I love it. We have a couple more questions, but unfortunately we're out of time here. Like I said, reach out to us on our socials. We're going to try to create more of a dialogue online there. When we move into the closing portion of this, please remember that we have our survey that will enter you in a draw for some swag. And big thanks to our speakers. You've been so informative. Looking forward to doing more engagement on Métis treaty talks. Maybe that'll be something in the future. We'll see. This is only our second session. Big thanks to our participants. This couldn't have been done without you. Canadian Roots Exchange, Rising Youth, and Western Arctic Youth Collective for a bunch of administrative things and funding. Next week, we'll be at the same time. We'll notify you on the speaker then. And like I said, this is a pilot project. So if you do that questionnaire and share your feedback, we're still learning what we're doing. And what we're titling this series is actually called Talk Treaty to Me. And I forgot my slogan right at the beginning to show you how much I'm supposed to say, talk treaty to me. And like a nice smooth jazz voice, but I missed that. But I did have a song written, and Alyssa keeps telling me to do the ending song. So it's Treaty Talks. Yeah. And yeah, thanks so much. And I'll end it with that. I think we're going to stick on for a few minutes. So yeah, that's it for now. That's the main portion of the programming.
You guys are awesome.